And I know I can rely on each and every one of you to walk with me as we continue as a church, as a community of friends of Jesus, as believers, to announce the good news, to announce the gospel.
The words from the new leader of the world's 1.4 billion Catholics. Pope Leo XIV led his first Mass as pontiff with cardinals at the Sistine Chapel. Well, those who grew up with him knew him as Robert Prevost. He is the first American-born pope. The election of this Chicago native surprised even his own siblings.
It was like, oh my God, it's Rob. It's never going to be the same. What are we going to do? Oh, yes, it's Rob. Yeah.
It's hard to put into words. I mean, how can one be more proud of someone who is not only the Pope, but the first American Pope, the first Pope from Chicago, and my brother?
My brother. Well, CBS News Chicago's Vince Gerasole is standing by in Rome with more on this Illinois background. But first, let's get to Santiago Gómez, a reporter with Latina, who's joining us live now from Peru. Santiago, this new bishop of Rome spent much of his life in Peru, even getting dual citizenship. What's been the reaction there? It has to be a huge point of pride.
Hi, Reed. Hello to everyone. Yes, of course. It's a strong emotion of blessing. From Chicago to Chiclayo is the headline here in Peru. Imagine how many people, for sure hundreds of Peruvian, listened to his masses, hundreds baptized or married by Pope Leo, known here as Padre Roberto, you know?
Well, tell us more about the work that he did there. We know that he follows in the tradition of Pope Francis, who said he valued so much being among the people, even famously said that the shepherd should smell like the sheep, so to speak. Is that what you saw there in Peru, in that leadership, that he was among the people and right there in the communities?
Yes, you know, he's well known for being so close to poor people. He actually did his big work in Chiclayo diocese, also worked in Trujillo, and he first landed here in Chulucanas. Those are three little cities in the northern coast of Peru, cities with a lot of troubles, with poverty, you know. A recent story about Pope Leo's work here in Peru was he used to help and visit their neighbors in Chiclayo in 2023 when it was a big flood here, and you could see him with boots spreading the word. Also, here Peruvians remember how he asked for donations to buy 2 medical oxygen plants during the pandemic. You know? So he's like a big presence here in Peru.
So a pope from the north and the south, with those very important perspectives, at least from the Americas. How do you think that will shape his papacy?
I think it's really important. I think actually it shows us that he's a universal priest, that he has like these roots in the US, but has a big commitment to give his work to these poor little towns here in Peru, you know, and I'm hearing that this special situation that he worked with the poor, like maybe draw the line to being elected Pope, you know, and it was a surprise here for the leaders of the Peruvian Catholic Church because he is well known in the northern region of Peru, but not so known here in Lima, in the capital city, you know, and that is really considered a miracle here. Yesterday, even the president, Dina Boluarte, claimed Pope Leo as a Peruvian, adoptive Peruvian. Also, the Congress made a pause to give him a round of applause.
I can just hear the voices of many a Peruvian grandmother to their grandchildren saying, go to Mass, go to Mass.
Yes.
Thank you so much for talking to us today. We appreciate it. So now we have the opportunity to head to Vince Gerasole from CBS News Chicago in Rome for this momentous occasion. Vince, tell us more about the Pope's time in Chicago.
Well, you know, his is really a Chicago story and an all-American story. He comes from a background that so many of us can identify with. You know, Chicago's a working class kind of town. It's also a place where there aren't a lot of pretenses. And he came from Dolton, Illinois. It's a small community just outside the borders of Chicago. His mother was a librarian. His father was an educator and a school principal. And he always went to church with his family. Church was a big part of his life. Apparently, according to his brothers, when he was younger, he would also sort of play priest. He would perform masses at home when he was a young man. But he came from a background that was just about as American as you can get. When he became older and then became educated, he went off to different places to study, but he came back to Chicago and he got a master's at the Catholic Theological Union to further ground him in his spirituality and to help him with his mission work. There was a time when he was also, after going to Peru and spending so much time in that part of the world, he did come back to Chicago. He's an Augustinian and he was responsible for directing Augustinian orders in the middle of the country, and Chicago was certainly an important part of his base. And his ties to his family are really, I think, what describe the kind of person he is. Because if you can talk to his brothers, who only talked to him a few days ago, you might understand the kind of person he is. So we know some of the things he likes. For example, apparently he's a fan of thin crust pizza, not deep dish pizza, which might surprise you if you're thinking about Chicago. And he's also a fan of the White Sox. And if you ever come to Chicago, you'll know that our allegiances to our baseball teams really divide the city. So, and I'm all the way over here in Rome. I can feel the excitement from Chicago, all these miles away. Chicago could not be prouder and not embrace this moment any fuller. And you know, when a city can embrace someone and see them as human, I think sometimes we forget to see popes as human. They're regal or they're other. But we're seeing a real man, a real American. And if that sort of opens the door for us to see the spiritual side of him, that benefits the church. But there's a person there who we can identify with. And even though he spent so many years away from the United States working on his mission, he had an American upbringing. We all are our roots to some shape or form. And that's what we find out with Pope Leo from Chicago. Wow.
Wow, indeed. And you know, that chapel right after the election that they go into to be asked if they accept the election results is known, I'll probably botch this term, but the Chapel of Tears. And that's because the weight of the world sort of hits the person who is elected, that now these modern issues are confronting an ancient church. Is there any thought about how his Chicago upbringing causes him to see some of these modern issues that this ancient church now has to confront and face?
Oh, you know, that's a great question, because I said this a little bit earlier. We are not a fancy pants city. Even if you go to the poshest corners of Chicago, there's kind of a grit and or just a homespun, down to earth quality to people from Chicago, and that's what we got in the Pope, at least according to everyone who's spoken about him. You know, they speak about his spiritual side, his dedication to serving the poor, being dedicated to those on the margins of society. If you take a look at salt of the earth people, sometimes that's exactly who they are. They are that person. And material things in the world don't get in their way. And I think it's easy from the outside looking in, trying to interpret who is Pope Leo. I think it's easy to draw a connection between his solid Midwestern roots, his family's grounded service within their own Catholic church and their own Catholic community. You can kind of tell what kind of person he has become. Now, what we have to see now is, will the papacy change him? Will he grow in other ways? And there is a weight on his shoulders. But I think right now, there's no one in Chicago who'd be unhappy with this choice. The city is just exploding with pride.
That's right. And I have a feeling everywhere you go, Vince, between now and the end of the year, you are going to be asked about what it was like likely you're going to have to pull out your journal entries for many years to come to talk about that story. Vince Gerasole, so nice to talk to you.
I've also never heard the word Chicago said so much in Rome in my entire life. Every third word.
Well, Chicago, Chicago, that toddling town, you make it clear there to people in Rome what Chicago is all about. The windy city blowing a mighty wind all the way to the Vatican. Thank you so much, Vince.